Forbidden Love, Can Themba. Dora Randolph was now running in the dark, down the road that dipped into the hollow of the bridge spanning the stream that separated Noordgesig from the western areas. From the bridge, the road climbed the hillock and sailed away to New Clare, Western Township, and Sophiatown. He must have seen her, for his dark form swam toward her and caught her in his strong arms. "Not here, darling," he said hastily. "Some car lights may strike upon us." He led her higher up the road into the tall grass. Suddenly she caught his coat lapels and dragged him down into the tall grass so that no one could see them. He clambered towards her and curled her into his arms. His lips thrilled upon hers, burningly sweet, and with digging fingertips she tried to find the source of his fire in his spinal column. Then the flames went out of them, settling into a low glow. She broke away with a sigh. She caught a stalk, put it in her mouth, and turned to look at the scattered lights of Noordgesig. "They were at it again, sweetie," she said between her teeth, "and what makes me mad is that I cannot fight back any more." "What did they say now?" Mike asked, a little worried. "Mr. Van Vuren was at our place again. It looked almost as if Dad had called him in to preach to us. He spoke about how terribly important it is that we keep away from the natives, otherwise we would be associated with them. And his voice had a trick of making that word associated sound horrible. But what made me hate him was the way he stared at Louisa as he spoke. Louisa is that sister of yours who is dark, isn't she?" Michael Chabakeng asked. He had seen her once at the Rhythmic Cinema with Dora, and he remembered how she was darker even than he, and that she had woolly, kinky hair like his. Dora went on. "Yes, the dark one. And I feel like giving back to them all the hurt that they make little Louisa suffer. Why wasn't it I, Mike? Why wasn't I dark instead of fair? Then you might not have been so afraid of my love." "Huh?" Michael was so taken aback by the sudden tenseness in her tone that he didn't quite know what to say. She turned her head and placed her chin onto his chest. "Somehow, Mike," she tried to explain, softened again now, "I feel trapped by a doubly guilty shame. I'm ashamed that it's my people who are in the forefront of every move against your people. Ashamed of my father, whom I love, but who is violent in his hatred of Africans. Ashamed of my sister Louisa, who ought to feel nearer your people, but hates them so unreasonably. Ashamed of my brother's shame for having been classified African. Ashamed of my mother's silence when I suspect, I know it, that she disapproves of their attitudes. And then, sweetie, sometimes when I listen to them all, I'm ashamed, in a queer way, that I hate of the secret love of ours." "Oh!" Michael drew her close, and then his voice came, softly, as if it came out of the grass. "I don't know if I can make you understand this, but, darling, everybody's trouble is that he's afraid. Everybody, even you and I. Your father and that Mr. Van Vuren are afraid their old world is turning over and they will now have to fight for things. And they are not used to fighting. They have too long. He searched frantically for words that would not hurt her, and at last said weakly, "Too long not fought." "Yes, Mike," she said. "Your sister, Louisa, is afraid because of this thing that might tear her away from you, all who she loves, and from the comparative safety of your way of life. This thing, this business of becoming an African is nearest to her. Seems would soonest catch her in its cruel fingers. More than the fear of your father and Mr. Van Vuren, hers is most likely to become cruel." Michael thought about what he was saying for a moment. The significance of his own words was only just becoming clear even to himself. "But my mother, Mike, I can't understand her silence." "I'm not sure I can understand everybody's fear," Michael said after a moment. "But tell me, haven't you ever felt that your mother chooses silence because she doesn't want to say anything that might influence her children?" "I see, Mike," Dora said, feeling with her fingers for the hard swelling of his biceps. "And my fear is that I know I'm doing just the thing that my mother fears her words might influence us into doing. Partly, but my dear, let's forget all the world's fear. Let's forget even your fear and mine. Between you and I, there is, lying side by side with a fear, a faith. Let's feed the faith. Let's talk of love." "No, sweetie, let's not talk of love. Let's just lie still in each other's arms and feel it." After a long while he released her, raised her to her feet. "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock show at the Rhythmic. Here's your ticket." He kissed her again. The headlights of a car on a bend higher up shone on them for a moment. A ghost-like shadow flew out to Noordgezicht like a tongue flicked out of a mouth mockingly. As the driver of the car dipped into the bowl toward the river and the bridge, he said to his companion, "That guy must sure have a dangerous weapon." In their 2-room apartment in Sophiatown, Michael was again nagging his sister about the one thing that was eating into his peace of mind. "You keep stalling, dodging me. But do you think it's really in the best interests of the child that you hide its name? After all, I've been thinking of getting married myself sometime soon," and his voice trailed off. "Don't you worry, Mike," Salome said. "I've the child's true interest at heart, but there are times when there is good reason for not doing the obvious thing. I assure you the child's father is an honourable man. That is all I can say for the moment. You must trust me." Michael looked into the fire in the stove, his mouth twisted into a strained grimace of concentrated thinking. "I still don't like it," he said at length. "What about you? What about your future? However romantic, I don't like the picture of a man who will not stand up to his responsibilities. You don't understand." And she began to hum one of those catchy songs that fill the streets of Sophiatown now and then for a brief spell. Michael felt beaten again. He was always beaten in this game. The trouble was that he had full confidence in his sister's intelligence. But this, she was right, he could not understand. He remembered something he had heard somewhere. A woman in love is operating at the lowest level of the intellect. He went out. Meneer Karelse of the Noordgezicht Primary School leaned over the gate of the schoolyard and looked for the small group of coloured boys who would be sitting in a circle in a corner of the yard. He called one of them. "Take my bag and put it into the history classroom," he said to the sandy-haired, smart-looking youngster who came up to him. He looked at the circle of boys wistfully. He knew what they were doing now during these precious few minutes before lessons started. They were teasing each other in the age-old school tradition. Probably vulgar, the naughty little scamps, he thought tolerantly as his mind went back to his own school days as a youngster. Then he hurried away to Aunt Sunny's house for that daily cup of coffee. Meanwhile, Freddie Williams, the sandy-haired, smart-looking youngster, sped across the playground to the history classroom. Freddie was not going to miss that morning session of their little tease club. But gee, they got Bobby Randolph at last. Freddie had met Dick Peters that morning on their way to school, and that eternal victim of Bobby Randolph's teased tongue had intimated to Freddie that he had a bombshell with which he was going to blow Bobby to bits and blazes. That is why, as he went flying over the playground, Freddie had shouted to the gang already assembled, "Wait for me!" Dick Peters did wait for Freddie. He wanted a full audience, and he wanted to make sure that his friend Freddie was present in case of any fighting. Freddie was still gasping for breath when Dick stood up, faced Bobby, and exploded his bombshell without finesse or ceremony. "Your sissy goes with a native? You lie!" "Yes, it's true. I seen her by the bioscope on Saturday." "Your sissy goes with a native?" The gang burst into laughter. Bobby broke loose with such a fierce barrage of blows upon Dick that they both tumbled over onto the ground. Dick did not stand a chance. Bobby's arms were flailing into his face and the blood was spurting out. Dick yelled out with such sudden fear and pain. Meneer Karelse had to push aside the cheering youngsters before he could get at the rolling fighters. He pulled Bobby off and held the two apart. "What are you fighting for?" "He hit me first," Dick said inconsequentially. "Why did you hit him, Bobby?" "He says my sister goes with a native." "It's true," Dick shouted. "I seen them myself on Saturday by the bioscope." For a moment, Meneer Karelse was stunned by the news. Through his mind rushed with painful vividness the picture of his proposal of marriage to Dora Randolph and the disdainful rejection she had given him. He could see again her lip curling up in contempt. He knew, he had always known, that she rejected him because of his drinking habits that were notorious in the township, but he felt too deeply hurt to admit his weakness. Suddenly his own lip curled up as a malicious thought darted through his mind. "To the head you go, both of you," he said as he dragged them away. After Mr. Phillips had taken in the whole story, he sent the youngsters off, asking them to report back to him at 1:30 when the school dismissed. He told Meneer Karelse to wait a moment as he wanted to talk to him. "Meneer," began the head with a pained expression in his eyes, "it is our duty to hush up the whole cruel affair. You know, we could handle the youngsters and the matter need not go further than this school." But Yes, but I think we owe it to the girl's family to tell them of the danger their daughter is putting them in. Meneer Karelse was most sanctimonious. Mr. Phillips stared at the lean man before him long and hard before he spoke. Of course, our interest is just for the good and safety of the family. We do not have, with deep emphasis, any desire to do them harm. It would not somehow mysteriously happen to be that the whole world knows of it. Really, I must say, was all Meneer Karelse could manage. Then both men stared silently out of the window. It was a long minute before Mr. Phillips could say, "That will be all, Meneer," but it did somehow mysteriously happen that the whole world came to know of it. Dora's disgrace was on everyone's lips. To everybody, except to Dora herself, this was disaster. She decided that it was release from the long months of stolen, forbidden love and felt a thrill in defiance. This, of course, gave added fuel to the wagging tongues. On the bus, within earshot of her father, one man was heard to remark, "I learned the brazen hussy doesn't care at all. It just goes to show the government isn't exactly wrong in all cases that it reclassifies back to Kaffir." Old man Randolph winced. To restore some of the Randolph family honor, Dora's brother, Davy, got together a few of his friends who solemnly pledged to put matters right. Just wait till we catch him. If Michael had seen the group of young coloured lads near the doorway of the rhythmic cinema that Saturday, he would not have suspected a thing. He had decided to take it easy with Dora since he had received a hurriedly scribbled note that the whole thing had cracked, despite her insistence that she didn't care a damn. He had written her that, for some time at least, if they wanted to go to the cinema, that they would have to go on separate occasions. But this was a great picture. He'd read about it in the papers and just had to see it. He knew that Dora was going to be there, but he hoped she would understand. At the cinema, he saw a group of African fellows gesticulating and arguing heatedly with the manager. He went up to them and found to his annoyance that the film was banned for children under 12 and natives. Suddenly he heard a voice shouting, "Oh, beat up the bloody Kaffirs!" As he swung round, a coloured chap caught him by the shoulder and hit him on the mouth, cutting his upper lip. "Davy! Don't!" came Dora's shriek from somewhere, and Michael knew that he had it. She appeared before him and faced her brother. His eyes opened wide. "So this is the bloody bastard! Hey boys, this is Dora's Kaffir." They ignored the other Africans who scampered away in all directions and crowded in on Michael and Dora. Dora turned to Michael and in a fierce but reassuring whisper said, "I'm with you in this to the end." As they closed in, Michael pushed Dora behind him and faced Davy. "Look, Davy boy," he said tersely, "take my advice and don't do it. I'm not scared of being beaten up. I'm scared of what this will mean. Take my advice and don't do it." "Ye face," said Davy. "What does he think he can do? Nothing." In a flash, he kicked Michael in the stomach so that he doubled up. Someone caught hold of Dora and held her fast. The others jumped upon Michael and rained blows on him in a mad fury. He made no attempt to fight back. Only instinctively he protected his face as best he could. Someone blew a police whistle and the attackers dashed in the maze of byways and alleys of Fordsburg. Michael was out cold. When he came to, Dora was weeping over him. He tried to lift himself but could not. She helped him up, still crying bitterly. Together they staggered to the bus stop off to Sophia Town. At home, Michael fainted again, so Dora had to explain to his sister what had happened. She introduced herself and began to relate the events exactly as they had happened. A queer look of amusement came into Salome's face. "Randolph? Randolph? Randolph, you say? And your brother's name is Davy? Davy Randolph? I've got an idea. You stay here, and as soon as Mike is well enough, we'll go and see old Davy, ne?" For days, Salome did not speak about the matter. The two women who loved Michael so much looked after him, nursed him back to health. Then, one Sunday morning, Salome said suddenly, "Look, you two, I think it's time we went to see old Davy. I want a little word with him." "Oh, cut it out. I don't want any more trouble," said Michael. "Oh, no, there won't be trouble at all. Just a little talk," Salome said mysteriously. Dora accompanied them to her home, her heart beating wildly. They found the whole family at lunch. Even Mr. Van Vuren was there, philosophizing expansively. Davy went pale when he saw the threesome walk in. Before they could say anything, Salome took over. "Hello, Davy," she began. "Remember me? You beat up my brother because he's in love with your sister. Okay, now I've brought my brother to beat you up because you were in love with his sister. Fair enough. You lie, Davy said hoarsely. I thought you'd say that, so I brought some proof. Where do you suppose I got this handsome picture of yours, Davy? And just in case you deny that one too, I'd like your father to read these flaming letters you once wrote to me. She pushed a neatly tied bundle of letters to the old man, saying tartly, and to think I treasured these letters because they came from the only man I ever loved. The old man seemed only then to be suddenly galvanized into life. Get out of my house, he shrieked. Salome kept cool. Oh no, you don't. If you get tough, I'll take your son to court for not supporting his child for the last 3 years. She turned to her brother. Mike, you've been asking me all the time who the father of my child was, and I've been silent. I told you it's a man I love, a man who would come into the open if he could, but that his circumstances were exceptional. You thought it was a married man. Well, that is the man. She pointed a trembling finger at Davy. The family was stunned. Salome was now heaving with emotion. The old man grabbed the packet of letters and said, "You can't prove it." Salome laughed out, a hard, cruel laugh. "There's one letter at home, the one in which your son begged me not to expose him." Then Dora's mother spoke out. "My grandchild! I've got a grandchild! My God, I must see that child!" Something in the old lady's voice calmed Salome. "Yes, mother," she said softly. Michael and Dora walked out quietly. She looked into his eyes and said, "Somehow I think the fear will fade away now."